It was both powerful and nonpartisan. And no matter what side you take, you felt the emotion as House lawmakers recounted their very own traumatic and personal accounts of back alley abortions, being raped, and confronting teenage pregnancy during a hearing on Capitol Hill yesterday. Some of these stories told for the very first time as a potentially groundbreaking abortion case heads to the Supreme Court today. Mary Alice Parks has more for us.
It was an extraordinary hearing on Capitol Hill. Several sitting members of Congress sharing deeply personal stories about their own abortions.
But I'm compelled to speak out because of the real risks of the clock being turned back to those days before Roe versus Wade, to the days when I was a teenager and had a back alley abortion in Mexico.
Terminating my pregnancy was not an easy choice. Choosing to have an abortion was the hardest decision I had ever made.
Congresswoman Cori Bush testifying that she was raped as a teenager, got pregnant, but chose to abort her pregnancy.
To all the black women and girls who have had abortions and will have abortions, we have nothing to be ashamed of. We live in a society that has failed to legislate love and justice for us.
The issue of reproductive rights front and center again after Texas began implementing one of the most restrictive laws in the country, designed to outlaw abortions after about 6 weeks before most women even know they are pregnant. Dr. Moyetti, a Texas OBGYN, says her fellow providers are confused by the new law.
They're worried they will have to delay life-saving care for people who are very sick. It has made it extremely dangerous to be pregnant in Texas, where our maternal morbidity and mortality rate is already unconscionably high.
In response to the Texas law, the House of Representatives passed a bill last week that would cement the protections of the landmark Roe v. Wade Supreme Court case. But the bill has stalled in the Senate. Congresswoman Kat Cammack told her mother's story. Single and having suffered a previous stroke, she chose not to have an abortion, and that's why Cammack says she opposes abortion.
I would not be here had it not been for the very brave choice that my mother made. You can imagine the pain that she felt when her own family told her that she needed to abort her child.
Mary Alice Parks, ABC News, Washington.
And our thanks to Mary Alice for that. Well, that emotional hearing on Capitol Hill was sparked by the much anticipated hearing that's happening today in Texas that could potentially overturn the state's extremely controversial abortion law, as a federal judge is set to hear the Justice Department's request to freeze that law that prohibits most abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy. Professor at Cardozo Law School and ABC News contributor Kate Shaw joining us once again for more on what to expect today. So, Kate, what will the judge be listening for exactly today?
Well, Kira, I expect it'll be a very heated hearing in Texas District Court. We'll be hearing both from the Biden Justice Department. As you said, this is the big lawsuit filed by the federal government, which says it has an interest in enforcing the Constitution, and this Texas law violates the Constitution. So we'll hear from DOJ, we'll hear from Texas lawyers, and we'll also hear from several interveners, including an Arkansas man, a disbarred lawyer on home confinement, who was the first person to file a lawsuit under this new Texas law. He sued a doctor, Dr. Alan Braid, who announced publicly that he had performed an abortion in violation of the law, in part, it seems, to allow a court to actually hear a case that involves a dispute about, a violation of the law. So he has been given time to argue, and several other interveners as well. So we'll be hearing from a number of lawyers and parties. And I don't think anyone expects necessarily that there will be a ruling today, but we will probably get a real sense of whether, one, the federal government has been able to kind of resolve the procedural obstacles that have kept previous courts from reaching this constitutional question of whether the law survives constitutional scrutiny. And then two, whether this district court is likely to find, if he reaches the merits, that the law does violate the Constitution. So I think we'll get at least pretty strong signals as to both of those issues today.
So what are the different possible outcomes, and how likely is it that the law could be overturned?
I think if the judge reaches the merits, it's highly likely the law will be overturned. The law clearly violates Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey. Nobody really even disputes that, including Texas. The question is whether, if this case reaches this Supreme Court, that court might change the governing standard around constitutional protection for abortion. So I think it's very likely, if this court reaches the merits, that the law will be struck down. The question then is what happens on appeal. So the Fifth Circuit, the appeals court, to which this case would initially be appealed if Texas lost, is quite conservative and I think might well uphold the law. But even if it doesn't, this case is going to be likely on a very fast track to the Supreme Court. And we just don't know what this newly constituted Supreme Court will do. We haven't had an abortion case with the 3 new Trump appointees hearing and participating in the case. So it's not clear whether the court might even allow a law like this to stand. They already have one big abortion case they're scheduled to hear December 1st. That's a case out of Mississippi. So they may well be adding this Texas case to the docket either later this year or early next year. So we'll have a sense before too long of what this court is thinking about the future of constitutional right to abortion.
What's it been like on the ground there in Texas since this law went into effect?
Well, most legal abortion has essentially ground to a halt in Texas. So clinics and providers have said that 85 to 90% of the procedures they were previously performing, they can no longer perform. So, very early abortions are still permitted under this law, about 6 weeks since the last menstrual period. So that's a very small window of time. But of course, some women do seek abortions in that very early window. So it's not as though there are no abortions being performed, but most people who seek abortion care are more than 6 weeks pregnant. And so I think many, many women have been leaving Texas and going to neighboring states. Places like Oklahoma have seen a real influx in women leaving Texas to obtain abortion care elsewhere. And I think many women are likely resorting to things, individually trying to sort of outside of the clinic and legal system to address their pregnancies. And certainly some women are carrying pregnancies that they would have otherwise not carried to term. But it has radically changed the landscape on the ground in terms of access to abortion in Texas. It's a month today that the law has been in effect.
What do you think the broader impact of today's hearing, not just for Texas, but could be for the entire country?
Well, I think Texas has, for the last 30 days, has enforced the most restrictive abortion law that we have seen in the nearly 50 years since Roe versus Wade was decided. That's a 1973 opinion. So if the law after today, if the law remains in effect, now again, it may remain in effect while the court considers the submissions before ruling. So just because we don't get a ruling today doesn't mean we might not ultimately get a ruling next week or the week after. But I think that if Texas is permitted to enforce this law, very likely other states will quickly follow suit, potentially even modeling their laws exactly on the one that Texas has passed and is now enforcing. So that may be one way that abortion just grinds to a halt in many states in the country. Many states will not do so, right? So abortion access is, pretty broadly available in some states. But so we could end up with this real patchwork. We already have something of a patchwork. Mississippi, for example, hasn't outlawed abortion, but has only one clinic in the state. So we could see some states with very limited access or virtually no access, and other states with relatively expansive access. But ultimately, I think the Supreme Court is likely to resolve this issue on a nationwide basis. Again, either scaling back the broad protection for abortion that has been in effect for the last 50 years, or potentially even overruling Roe versus Wade outright, which would mean there's no constitutional protection for abortion. And more than half the states, it is predicted, would move virtually immediately to ban most or all abortions. So all of that could be coming down the pike.
All right, professor at Cardozo Law School and ABC News contributor Kate Shaw. We will follow all of this along with you and the hearing today for sure. Kate, thanks.
Thank you, Kira.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.